Hello everyone and welcome to another session on Microsoft Azure Fundamental. So let's get started with the question. So the question is that you plan to deploy a website to Azure. The website will be accessed by users worldwide and will host large video files. You need to recommend which Azure feature must be used to provide the best video playback experience. What should you recommend? And the options are option A, an application gateway. Option B, an Azure Express Route Circuit. Option C, a content delivery network, that is CDN. And option D, an Azure Traffic Manager profile. And the correct option is the content delivery network. So what is a content delivery network? So this diagram basically depicts a content delivery network. So here, let's suppose this is the origin server. Let's suppose our video file is stored here. And these nodes are basically the part of the content distributed network. So when, let's suppose, a user one accesses this video file, its copy is cached here or it is also stored here. So each time a new user or same user again accesses the file, then it is made available from this edge server, and so there is little delay and little performance impact and a very good or best playback experience to the user. So that is the concept of content delivery network, to deliver the content, especially the video, to the nearest location to the user for best playback experience. Question number 77 is that you have an Azure web app. You need to manage the settings of the web app from an iPhone. What are two Azure management tools that you can use? Each correct answer presents a complete solution, and the options are A, Azure CLI, B, the Azure portal, C, Azure Cloud Shell, D, Windows PowerShell, and E, Azure Storage Explorer. And the correct options are the Azure portal and the Azure Cloud Shell. So what are these? So the Azure portal is the web-based portal for managing Azure. Being web-based, you can use the Azure portal on iPhone. Azure Cloud Shell is a web-based command line for managing Azure. You access the Azure Cloud Shell from the Azure portal. Being web-based, you can use the Azure Cloud Shell on an iPhone. Question number 78 is that your company plans to deploy several million sensors that will upload data to Azure. You need to identify which Azure resources must be created to support the planned solution. Which two Azure resources should you identify? Each correct answer present part of the solution. And the options are option A, Azure Data Lake, option B, Azure Queue Storage, option C, Azure File Storage, option D, Azure IoT Hub, Internet of Things Hub, and option E, Azure Notification Hubs. And the correct options are the Azure Data Lake and the Azure IT Hub. What are these? So this is the definition and explanation of the data lake and IoT Hub. If you want, you can pause the video and read the explanation. Question number 79 is that your company plans to deploy an artificial intelligence solution in Azure. What should the company use to build, test, and deploy predictive analytics solution? And the options are option A, Azure Logic Apps, option B, Azure Machine Learning Designer, option C, Azure Batch, and option D, Azure Cosmos DB. And the correct option is the Azure Machine Learning Designer. So the Azure Machine Learning Designer lets you visually connect datasets and modules on an interactive canvas to create machine learning models. Question number 80 is that what can you use to automatically send an alert if an administrator stops an Azure virtual machine? And the options are option A, Azure Advisor, Option B, Azure Service Health. Option C, Azure Monitor. And option D, Azure Network Watcher. And the correct option is the Azure Monitor. So with the Azure Monitor, you can set up alerts based on metrics and logs data, and you can receive notification through email, SMS, webhooks, and other channels. In case of an Azure virtual machine, you can use Azure Monitor to set up an alert that triggers if the virtual machine goes down or become unavailable. This way, you can receive an alert as soon as the virtual machine stops, allowing you to take prompt action and resolve the issue. Question number 81 is that you have an Azure environment. You need to create a new Azure virtual machine from a tablet that runs the Android operating system. What are three possible solutions? Each correct answer represents a complete solution. And the options are: option A, use Bash in Azure Cloud Shell. Option B, use PowerShell in Azure Cloud Shell. Option C, use the Power Apps portal. Option D, use the Security and Compliance Admin Center. And option C, use the Azure portal. So the correct options are: A, use Bash in Azure Cloud Shell. B, use PowerShell in Azure Cloud Shell. And E, use the Azure portal. So the Android tablet will have a web browser Chrome that's enough to connect to the Azure portal. The Azure portal offers three ways to create a VM. And what are these? Using the graphical portal, using Azure Cloud Shell using Bash, and using the Azure Cloud Shell using PowerShell. Question number 82 is that a team of developers at your company plans to deploy and then remove 50 virtual machines each week. All the virtual machines are configured by using Azure Resource Manager templates. You need to recommend which Azure service will minimize the administrative effort required to deploy and remove the virtual machines. What should you recommend? The options are: option A, Azure Reserved Virtual Machine Instances. Option B, Azure Dev Test Labs. Option C, Azure Virtual Machine Scale Sets. And option D, Azure Virtual Desktop. And the correct option is the Azure Dev Test Labs. So this is the explanation of the Azure Dev Test Labs. You can read it if you want to. Question number 83 is that an Azure administrator plans to run a PowerShell scripts that creates Azure resources. You need to recommend which computer configuration to use to run these scripts. Solution: run the script from a computer that runs Windows 10 and has the Azure PowerShell module installed. Does this meet the goal? The options are A, yes, and B, no. The correct option is yes. So the PowerShell script is a file that contains PowerShell commandlets and code. A PowerShell script needs to be run in PowerShell. In this question, the computer has the Azure PowerShell module installed. Therefore, this solution does meet the goal. Question number 84 is that which service provides serverless computing in Azure? The options are A, Azure Virtual Machines, B, Azure Functions, C, Azure Storage Account, and D, Azure Dedicated Hosts. And the correct option is the Azure Functions. So the Azure Functions provide a platform for serverless code. Azure Functions is a serverless compute service that lets you run event-triggered code without having to explicitly provision or manage infrastructure. Question number 85 is that your company has several business units. Each business unit requires 20 different Azure resources for daily operation. All the business units require the same type of Azure resources. You need to recommend a solution to automate the creation of the Azure resources. What should you include in the recommendations? And the options are option A, Azure Resource Manager templates, option B, virtual machine scale sets, option C, the Azure API Management Service, and option D, management groups. And the correct option is the Azure Resource Manager templates. Question number 86 is that what can you use to identify underutilized, keyword is underutilized or unused Azure virtual machines? The options are A, Azure Advisor, B, Azure Cost Management plus Billing, C, Azure Reservations, and D, Azure Policy. And the correct option is the Azure Advisor. Azure Advisor helps you optimize and reduce your overall Azure spending by identifying idle and underutilized resources. You can get cost recommendation from the cost tab on the Azure Advisor dashboard. Question number 87 is that a support engineer plans to perform several Azure management tasks by using the Azure CLI. You install the CLI on a computer. You need to tell the support engineer which tools to use to run the CLI. Which two tools should you instruct the support engineer to use? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. The options are A, Command Prompt, B, Azure Resource Explorer, C, Windows PowerShell, D, Windows Defender Firewall, and E, Network and Sharing Center. And the correct options are the A, Command Prompt, and Windows PowerShell. So for Windows, the Azure CLI is installed via an MSI or Microsoft installer, which gives you access to the CLI through the Windows Command Prompt or CMD or PowerShell. Question number 88 is that you have an Azure environment. You need to create a new virtual machine from a tablet that runs the Android operating system. Solution: you use the Power Apps portal. Does this meet the goal? And the options are yes or no. The correct option is no. It is because the Power App lets you quickly build business application with little or no code. It is not used to create Azure virtual machines. Therefore, this solution does not meet the goal. Question number 89 is that you have an Azure environment. You need to create a new Azure virtual machine from a tablet that runs the Android operating system. Solution: you use the Azure portal. Does this meet the goal? The options are again yes and no, and the correct option is yes. So the Azure portal indeed let us create a new Azure virtual machine. The Azure portal is basically a web-based unified console that provides an alternative to the command line tools. With the Azure portal, you can manage your Azure subscription using a graphical user interface. You can build, manage, and monitor everything from simple web apps to complex cloud deployments. Create custom dashboards for an organized view of resources. Configure accessibility options for an optimal experience. And the last question of today's session is that which Azure service provides a set of version control tools to manage code? The options are A, Azure Repos, B, Azure Dev Test Labs, C, Azure Storage, and D, Azure Cosmos DB. And the correct option is the Azure Repos or repositories. So the Azure Repos is a set of version control tools that you can use to manage your code. So that's all for today. Please like the video and stay tuned for the next session and the next video. Thank you and bye.